Hi, this video will discuss governmental policies that shift supply curves, and will also show you the impact of these policies using our welfare analysis. So the government can impact the competitive equilibrium in one of two different ways. First, it can shift the demand or supply curve, and second, it can create a wedge between the price and the marginal cost, driving us away from the competitive equilibrium. So the wedge we have in mind is a tax wedge. This video will focus on the first of these two scenarios where the government shifts supply curves. And two different ways the government can shift a supply curve. First, it could put a limit on the number of firms in the market, or second, it could impose a quota or a limit on how much output that each firm can produce. And now we're going to discuss a potential scenario where a government restricts the number of firms. The impact of these restrictions which shifts the supply curve to the left, will cause a higher price and reduced quantity. So consumers are harmed because they don't get as much consumer surplus as they would otherwise, because they don't benefit from those lower prices. And firms, they benefit. They get a higher profit due to the higher prices due to the output restriction. So let's show you what this would look like, and also provide some examples. So for example, the government imposes a permit if you are going to commercially harvest lobsters, and here the purpose is to prevent lobsters from being over harvested, and this is a way though of limiting the supply, which raises, of course, the price then of lobsters. And other examples include possibly restricting the number of taxi cabs that are provided to an area. And if you have such a supply restriction, we're going to show you how this increases price and also affects consumer welfare. So suppose we initially have S1 supply here at this lowest price, P1, without a restriction. And this would be supply curve 1, equilibrium output would be E1, causing a low price at P1, firms would just break even for the competitive taxi firm. Now, if we impose a supply restriction and say, hey, we're going to limit the number of taxi cabs at a certain point, that would cause the supply curve to have a positive slope after that restriction is reached, and that higher supply positive slope leads to a higher price, a new equilibrium E2, higher price. And that E2 impacts our consumer welfare, because before at a price P1, our consumer surplus was A, B, and C, and there was no producer surplus. Now at this new higher supply curve, S2, we see consumer surplus is only area 1. It's no longer areas B and C. And now we also have a producer surplus here of area B, which before we had, when price was P1, there was no producer surplus. So the total surplus, where is it? It's A and B, consumer and producer surplus, after you have this supply restriction. But note before, the total surplus was the same as consumer surplus, was A, B, and C. So we lose out on this area C by imposing this supply restriction. And this is common. Whenever you apply a supply restriction, you're going to generate a deadweight loss, and you're also, of course, going to have a smaller total surplus.